It is my great pleasure and honor to be here today, speaking with here Tak Ueha, partner at the consulting firm of McKinsey and Company, and Professor Brian Peck. He is the executive director at the Center of Transnational Law and Business, and adjunct professor of law at the USC Gould School of Law. I'm Nancy Yamaguchi. As Anjali mentioned, I am a partner at the global law firm of Morgan Lewis here in Los Angeles. I specialize in representing Japanese companies on their inbound U.S. Mergers and acquisitions, investments, and joint ventures. Recently, I've been doing a lot more work receiving many inquiries from U.S. companies wanting to invest and acquire businesses in Japan. So I've been doing both Japan side work, but more and more I'm doing U.S. Representing U.S. companies in their Japan transactions. That may be a recent trend, probably because Japan is a very predictable uh, and stable economic and business environment, which many investors appreciate. And in that context, I also focus on foreign direct investment review. Here in the US, it's done by what's called CFIUS, which stands for the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. And this is a multi agency federal government body sitting in Washington, D.C., that reviews acquisitions and investments by foreign or non-US entities from a US national security perspective. So, in that context, I've been recently involved in representing Keidanren, which is a Japanese business, one of the largest business organizations in Japan, in advising them and also representing them in supporting Nippon Steel's acquisition of U.S. Steel that is pending, but there should be a lot of action on that this month. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to Tak first to introduce himself and his background.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. Um, Very nice to meet you, everybody. My name is Tak Ueha. Full name is Takuto Ueha or Ueha です。よろしくお願いします。I am currently a partner at McKinsey and Company. It's a consulting firm, as some of you may know. Um, I will start out with my background. So I've started my career in automotive industry. Worked at Toyota in early 2000s. Um, Initially in more on the operation side, supply chain, later in the product development. I work in Japan, a little bit in the US, and also Thailand, and I was in automotive. I've been in consulting for past 15 years, initially in Tokyo, and I moved to Southern California 7 years ago. Today, I serve my clients mostly in automotive plus the adjacent industry. So advanced tech, consumer electronics, um, some semicon, some software, but mainly around automotive industry. Today, I would love to share what I've observed in reaction to the Trump 2.0. It's been a crazy few months, to say the least, for many of my clients as well as myself. I do serve both American companies as well as Japanese companies based here, as well as I was just in Japan last week as well. So we'd love to share a little bit of fresh perspective of how the company has been reacting from the industry side. And also, I do have some observation on what are some differences I observe and, what are maybe some of the learnings. Looking forward to discussion this very much. Thank you.
Over to you, Brian.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Peck, and I first of all like to thank the Asia Society for the opportunity to be here. It's an honor to be with you here this afternoon. Thanks to Nancy and to Tak for this panel. I started my relationship with Japan right out of college. I lived and worked there for 9 years in the private sector for both Japanese and U.S. companies. Came back and did law school and worked for the U.S. Department of Commerce on anti-dumping and countervailing duty issues, which involved a lot of Japanese cases at the time, including Japanese steel and the other imports. I then worked at USTR, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, under Wendy Cutler, no stranger to the Asia Society. I was Director of Japanese Trade Affairs and worked on such issues as the U.S. Japan IT Working Group and regulatory reform in e-commerce, telecom, and IP legal issues. I also worked in the private sector as a lawyer in a law firm on Japan issues. And then was appointed by Governor Jerry Brown back in 2013 to serve as his international trade advisor. We did a lot of work with Japan at the subnational government level. Since 2016, I've been at USC Gould School of Law as a law professor. I teach international trade law. And obviously, as Tak mentioned, just the impact of the Trump administration on his work, it gave me a lot of new material to teach the students this semester. So I have to thank him for that. Never a dull moment. But I look forward to this afternoon's discussions.
Great. So let's stick with you, Brian, because you're right. There's just a lot to teach, a lot to debate, a lot going on right now under Trump 2.0. And so, what are some of the key aspects of trade policy under the second Trump administration?
I think, first of all, as most people know, I mean, under Trump, President Trump, his basic baseline of policy is America first. And we're seeing a deconstruction of the World Trade Order, the rules-based multilateral trading system, which will have an impact not only on U.S. Japan relationships, but Japan's relationships with the rest of the world, because Japan, like the United States until the current administration, relied on the rules-based multilateral trading system for, after the World War II. This is going to have an impact. Both Consul General Sone and Ambassador Yamada mentioned the strength of the U.S. Japan relationship, which I also agree and believe in. But I think one of the linchpins, besides national security and defense and cultural ties and stuff like that, is the economic and trade relationship. And that, I think, is going to come into, heading into some turbulent times. Just, if these tariffs do go into effect, the 24% tariffs that President Trump proposed, on Japanese imports, along with the now 50% tariffs on steel imports, are going to have an impact, a real impact on Japan's economy, because it still relies a lot on exports to the U.S. market, but also will have the ripple effect of a breakdown of the world trading system, the rules-based trading system, as other trading partners engage in trade wars, including with China.
Interesting. And so just sticking with the tariffs, I have a running joke with my partners at the firm where, what was the tariff rate and the applicable tariffs at 9 a.m. in the morning is vastly different than what is the applicable tariffs at noon, and then at the end of the day, it changes again. So within that very changeable, fluid context, what are you seeing as the impact of the trade policy under Trump 2.0 on U.S. Japan relations in general?
Well, I think the first and most important front line of the impact is the uncertainty it creates for businesses. I mean, like you say, I can turn the newsfeed on an hour from now and they'll probably change again. That uncertainty affects investment, business decisions, market access. Again, all key linchpins for the economic and trade relationship between the U.S. and Japan. And so that uncertainty, I think, has a negative impact both in the short term and especially the longer term, the longer that these uncertainties of these tariffs will take place until they are implemented or not. And then you've got the legal challenge, which was a very interesting development last week, which leads to more uncertainty. And I think they've got a good case that the states and the small businesses that have brought the case against the administration, I think, have a strong legal standing to prevail ultimately. But when that time takes place, there's that uncertainty. And as we see, again, with the steel and aluminum tariffs, 25%, 50%, who knows what it will be again in the other days, and then there's carve-outs. So it will be, again, that uncertainty, I think, has a negative impact on businesses and on the overall U.S.-Japan economic and trade relationship.
So, Tak, over to you. So within this ever so changing, volatile environment, what are you seeing yourself recently in working with Japanese companies? How are they reacting to the current situation under Trump 2.0?
It's been quite interesting to see the change from January timing to now. I think generally speaking, regardless of what sector, and I'm going to address sector because some sectors are obviously much longer term oriented, and some sectors are much shorter term oriented in their business cycle. Generally speaking, from January through March, every client I've spoken to, Japanese, they were not very reactive, meaning, oh, okay, the tariff could go away with a tweet next week, which is actually true. It went back and forth, right? So most Japanese companies I've spoken to had, this may be a hiccup, we have to kind of let it see. I think there was a learning from Trump 1.0 as well. I think the switch turned on around March. Many companies actually started a little bit panicking almost. Still, the longer term perspective sectors were, haven't changed. They still haven't changed much today, which I think is actually a good thing. But my clients in automotive, semicon, consumer goods, a little bit of, maybe we shouldn't be just sitting and waiting to see how the game plays out. I think a lot of the American companies were reacting much faster to at least capture what the risk exposure is and also have a little bit of a scenario planning of what do we do tomorrow if it does actually get implemented. A lot of companies were actually sitting and waiting until mid-March. Then mid-March, I think very much variation of, depending on what company you speak to, some companies went all in firefighting mode. It reminded us of COVID. They stood up, the SWAT team, initially starting to see the impact on their financial performance for this year, supply chain team going crazy. So a huge variation in the reaction since March. I think most companies have stabilized today, actually, which again I think is a good result. But
how do you stabilize in an unstable world?
First, it's a little bit similar to COVID. Most companies have established some kind of intelligence collection team. So initially, in Japanese companies, there were many confusions because there was a huge reliance on individual operating team at division level to go find the latest news of what's happening to tariff next week. And of course, that causes issue because the sales team would think, next week it's going to change. I need to raise my price. Supply chain team, I need to go find another sourcing. To now, they have at least a team and a new structure where there's a single source of truth on the intelligence and also how you communicate within the organization. So it's gotten to the stable state in that sense that everyone's kind of established the cadence of how you react to the new changes.
Right, just adjusting to the changes, it seems. And now, have you noticed material differences between how Japanese companies specifically are responding to the current geopolitical environment under the second Trump administration versus other companies, non-Japanese companies?
I will say the variance is bigger across sectors than Japanese and American. But with that said, there's kind of common things I see in public communication. So many companies, regardless of the sector, have re-strategized their long-term strategy or short-term strategy, such as we're going to shift investment, like Honda shifted investment from Mexico to America, or Denso is announcing price increase. That's just like my close sector. But other sectors, they have reallocated their footprint in manufacturing from China to India. I think the common thing with Japanese companies, they're kind of quiet compared to many American companies, where once they make the strategy, they make an announcement to the stakeholders. The stakeholders include the government, suppliers, their customers, and I think it's a little bit of a loss that the communication is slightly lacking, or they're low tone compared to some of the competitive non-Japanese companies, because the announcement makes calmness and comfort to the stakeholders. They at least know how to react, or they won't bug you with, oh, what do I do under uncertainty. So that's the biggest observation I have with the Japanese companies. They tend to stay kind of low key on what they're thinking.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. That's consistent with my experience. I mean, Japanese companies generally do not tend to be litigious, though, we do plenty of plaintiff side work for Japanese companies as well. But setting that aside, it's very rare that, a Japanese company would be initiating litigation against the Trump administration. With the exception of Nippon Steel, of course. When you see U.S. companies addressing the same tariff issues, they do tend to be a lot louder, and you do see them in the courtroom a lot more often.
I mean, it's not just American companies. LG and Samsung are not American companies, but they have definitely strengthened their communication with the administrative team. And it's not necessarily creating additional conflicts. It's just, having the conversation and dialogue is more critical. Don't have to necessarily agree with everything, but, voicing is important.
Right. Interesting. So back to you, Brian. What are the objectives of the Trump tariffs, do you think? What is he trying to do here?
Depends on the day.
Okay, for today, right, at this moment, at,
there are three
1 p.m. Pacific.
There are three
This
stated
may change in 2 hours.
Yeah. There are three stated objectives. One is revenue. He's talked about tariffs, or using tariffs as a revenue to pay for the tax cuts and his other budgetary programs that he's proposed in his big, beautiful bill. Second is leverage, using them as a bargaining chip to get concessions from our trading partners, either directly economic concessions or more geopolitically based concessions. The third is to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States by forcing imports to be so expensive that it forces manufacturers to stop using overseas supply chains and bring manufacturing back to the United States. Those are our three stated objectives, but they're contradictory. If he wants to use them for revenue, by having high tariffs, you're going to decrease the amount of imports, which means less revenue. If you want to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States, that's fine and good with maybe some industries that U.S. has a long-standing history of manufacturing, such as steel. But take, for example, a simple example of coffee. The U.S. cannot grow enough coffee to feed its coffee demand. There are certain manufacturing sectors and certain other imports that the U.S. just does not have the capacity, either now or even in the long term, to fill in the lack of imports.
Do you think he's winning?
Winning?
Yeah.
No.
Sorry to jump in to ask questions.
No.
No, because it's kind of interesting. I think we have this,
we don't know yet, right?
Well, no, I mean winning in meeting those objectives you mentioned. I think it's very clear what he wants, right? And I was in discussion with ex-governor from U.S. now working in Australia, but there's perception of winning and there's actual winning, like in business or economy underneath, right? So, I think it is important that we don't completely just, take what's being tweeted or, being announced even on the major media sometimes, because if you look at the numbers and the fact base, sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, there's a lot of contradiction as you call out. So just wanted to see your perspective, whether he's getting closer to meeting that objective.
In his view, in his eyes, he's winning.
Yeah.
But I think in reality, as you say, the business factors show there's something different. And again, I think the biggest contradiction is in one terms, he wants to have revenue. In the other sense, he wants to restrict or decrease exhibited levels imports. The two don't match.
Yeah, now, in my conversations with people and contacts and clients in Washington, D.C., their view is that the tariffs are leading up to, and we're starting to see this with the latest tax bill in Congress right now, but this is leading up to a tax cut, right? Especially for the wealthy in the U.S. So by raising tariffs, you can cover, right, the revenue shortfall that the U.S. would experience as a result of tax cuts. But going back to bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., I mean, that was definitely a campaign slogan of his,
Yes.
right? So he is at least being consistent from that respect. But that doesn't happen overnight, right? For companies like Honda and Toyota, right, and others who already have manufacturing facilities here in the U.S., are you seeing kind of a ramp up of the existing facilities, Tak, or are there other like kind of new factory building initiatives that you're seeing? Because, for example, I know Isuzu just announced a huge new facility in South Carolina, right? But it takes time to fill that factory, right? So what are you seeing in terms of Japanese companies, both in terms of ramp up of domestic production and maybe new production facilities?
It's a $1 million question, right? But I think regardless of Trump or not, if you look at it from the market perspective, North America and US especially is still a very, sorry to sound very businessy, is very attractive. And where else do we have today, right? I think I 100% agree, building plants and building new footprints or moving plants take time. But so does growing a new rising market, right? So when you look at the rest of the world, I think, US is still very attractive. And I think companies in a longer perspective sector that I was mentioning, such as energy, not much has changed. The investment in Alaska, that's been talked for 20 years. It's not something that came new just because of Trump. Kind of similar in many other sectors as well. If you look at the market potential, I think US is still there is 0.1. Secondly, again, this is regardless of Trump as well. I think at the state level, there are a lot of interest to, of course, cultivate and incentivize companies to invest in each state. That hasn't changed. We know US is not everybody just, is 100% aligned with Trump, as we just discussed, right? So if you look at the state level, at individual level, it's not just the governors, but the public, right? There's a huge willingness and openness to welcome foreign investment, and Japan's actually very welcomed. So I see a huge, still positive in U.S. investment.
Interesting. Give us an overview, Brian, of the ongoing U.S. Japan trade negotiations. I mean, that started with Prime Minister Ishiba's visit earlier this year, I believe. But yeah, give us an overview and an update.
Well, sure. On April 9th or April 2nd, at Liberation Day, as President Trump called it, when he announced his reciprocal tariffs, he threw the gauntlet down and demanding that all our trading partners initiate trade agreements to give concessions that the Trump administration was looking for, not only on tariffs but on non-tariff barriers. Now, as a former U.S. trade negotiator, I was the lead negotiator for several of the Latin American FTAs in the IP chapter back in the 2000s. These trade agreements are very complex. They don't take days, they don't take months, they take years. And in the case of Japan, some of the issues that the Trump administration is seeking to address are legitimate concerns, but they've been concerns and subject of negotiations between the U.S. and Japan for years and years. So I think let me qualify when you ask me about whether is he winning. I think one area where maybe he has had some success is using it as a bargaining chip and using it as leverage to get our trading partners to make concessions. But in terms of having that 90-day deadline, July 9th, when he postponed it back in April, 90 days from April 9th, I think at the best that could happen with the U.S. and Japan trade negotiations is they come up with a framework where they agree to we'll move forward on specific issues of concern. But I think anything more than that is impossible.
Just when you say framework, what does that look like?
Well, you use as a template the agreement that the UK and U.S. achieved earlier in the year. They didn't get into specifics, but they set up areas of mutual concern or areas, especially that the U.S. wanted to address in terms of non-tariff barriers. And the framework is set up like these are the objectives that we want to achieve through longer-term negotiations.
But do you think that a lot of that is just kind of a fluff?
Yes.
And not to write devils in the details, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is it more of a photo op, or is there substance there?
Well, it's a way for him to claim victory, and a way to save face for both countries.
But Japan, I mean, just having been engaged in U.S. Japan transactions for 25 years now, like there's a level of specificity and detail, right, that really is required for any lasting agreement, including U.S. Japan trade negotiations. And so, I mean, do you think that realistically the July 9th deadline will be met? And
No.
So what are some of your predictions as to what's going to happen after that?
Well, as I said before, I mean, complex, successful trade agreements take several months, if not years, to complete. And the level of detail that the U.S. is demanding from Japan in terms of concessions on non-tariff barriers and regulatory reform are very complex, and would take a lot of time and effort from the Japanese side to remedy those concerns that the U.S. raises. And again, some of these have been subject of U.S.-Japan trade relationship for decades. So to see it be fixed in 90 days is kind of a quixotic dream.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So back to you, Tak. What are some of the struggles that you're seeing Japanese companies encounter in the current, highly volatile financial and economic environment? And I'm not just talking about the stock and the bond markets. I mean, there is a lot of volatility out there, just in terms of valuations, in terms of everything. So what are some of the real life struggles that you're seeing Japanese companies experience?
I think this long time, relatively speaking, I was talking about this over lunch too, lack of fluidity of talent at the top level with other companies that tend to be the issue for many of the legacy Japanese companies, combined with the delays in digitization, slows down the initial action taking. So I'm not necessarily promoting digital transformation just because I'm a consultant, right? But I actually observed this when semicon chip issue happened, or when this tariff issue happened, and sourcing some certain material is up for grab. There's constant delay in the reaction just because of those two things. And I saw this during COVID a little bit too. So those are probably two areas that I see, especially on the first point. Again, the talent fluidity thing doesn't happen overnight either, right? It's a cultural thing, and that's why I do think there should be more external outreaches and communication with, not just internal with your people and your stakeholders, but go out there and listen to other people and voice your opinion as well. Like that's where I think the Japanese companies struggle.
So when you say talent fluidity, I mean like shushin koyo, right? Like that's kind of changing. Right?
Yes.
Lifetime employment.
Not many companies keep that formally anymore, but we have many companies in Japan that, if you look at the top level, a lot of the people or the leaders are only experienced in that company, and that I think that hinders a little bit of this external exchange of communication. This includes with the government as well, right? Relatively speaking, I'm always kind of comparing Japanese companies versus others, and what are the root causes for these a little bit of lacking intelligence or the perspective. Yeah, I think it's a little bit rooted in the cultural thing.
But that's changing a lot, though, don't you think? I see a lot more Japanese, even at the executive levels, change companies.
Yes, but not at the speed I think the
Yeah.
world is changing.
Okay.
I have to say, like, I mean, it's, yeah, I cannot agree to that.
Though compared with the U.S., right, where people move every 2-3 years or whatever, right? I mean, there's
100%
just
agree. It's
no
it's a
continuity.
balance.
Right.
I'm not promoting one way. You know, it's a somewhere in the between. I think the balance is needed. Yes, 100% agree with you.
Interesting. So what are some of your practical business recommendations for those struggling Japanese companies in this world of great volatility?
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I might. I think the business leaders should push themselves to go out and be. I was talking with Andy about this too. Be more present. Show your presence at these, in external events, not just external events, but go meet and learn from others. You don't have to agree, but it helps to stimulate our thinking or evolve your thinking by going out there and exchanging your thoughts or your strategy with non-Japanese, not necessarily your stakeholder. I think we're really good at stakeholder management in general and having the tight organization. I do want to push for the external communication and exchange and alignment, including with government.
Yeah, and speaking of collaboration and exchanges with government, the state of California. I was also speaking to many people today regarding the really the size and the depth and the breadth of the economy that we have here in the state of California, which is thriving. And Brian, I mean, there is a trade relationship between the state of California and Japan directly, and this is very interesting because this is really taking place at the state and local levels, right? The subnational level. Now, how can California do? What can California do to facilitate more of that kind of trade with Japan, have more, generate more Japanese investment in California? I note this, and this is kind of personal to me because many of our clients and the companies that we work with are moving to Texas. So can you comment on that?
Sure. Well, a couple of things to keep in mind. One, the state of California has been a pioneer and a leader in subnational engagement between other subnational jurisdictions and even national governments, and that includes Japan. Our Governor Newsom has just said, after Deliberation Day, when Trump announced all the tariffs, said something very simple but very true, and that is California is not Washington, D.C. California is also the fourth largest economy in the world, and as Tak has mentioned, is an extremely attractive market to do business in, to invest, to build market share with your product and services and so like that. So given that as a background, I think especially with the uncertainty and the protectionist bent of the federal or the national administration, California can continue to take its lead in fostering subnational government cooperation, and California has done so over both Governor Brown's and Governor Newsom's administrations. There are now 8 MOUs between Japan and California, facilitating everything from combating climate change together to research and development, joint research and development in clean energy. When I was with Governor Brown, we worked with Japanese NEDO, which is a government-funded research and development agency, to build an EV charging. This is back in 2016, so this is when EV charging was still kind of a challenge in California. They built an EV charging network from San Francisco to Tahoe to facilitate or to incentivize the use of electric vehicles for recreational weekend use. There's more recent agreements are with the ports of California, especially LA and Long Beach, in decarbonization of the port operations. and establishing green shipping corridors between Japan and the California ports. There are also, there's an agreement between the Japan Business Investment Bank to facilitate investment in California. So California, I think, you can still, remain as a leadership in developing subnational government relationships and utilizing those as frameworks to incentivize new business opportunities for California and Japanese businesses in each other's jurisdictions.
And
Can I just pile on?
Oh,
on
please,
one
please.
thing? So I think, I know it exists, but it's not as explicit. A bit of clarity around strategic focus on certain technology or industry, I think, is needed. The Japan, unfortunately, I would say, have lost competitiveness in many sectors compared to maybe 30 years ago. And, to turn the situation around, I think a real need for strategic thinking is needed. And I know that's not what you mean, but Japan is just too general, I feel. So yes, Japan, but what about Japan? Do we double down, or California double down to reinvigorate? Doesn't mean we don't support all the sectors, but strategic priority and focus, I think clarity would help.
Yeah, and to that point, one of the MOUs that California has is with Osaka Prefecture, and they were very specific in the agreement to focus areas: clean energy, biotech, IT, strategic areas of new technology items that are important. So there is a template for that.
yeah, and I think there's also another MOU that was announced around energy installations. Because frankly, I mean, California, we do a ton of energy projects and project finance, but California is by far not only a thought leader in alternative and clean energy, but just energy projects in general. Right? There's just a lot of know-how here, and a lot of financing sources. So I want to get back to you, Tak, because we've been talking about the state level initiatives, subnational level developments. Let's take this to more of a transnational level, because I think there's a lot of lessons that Japanese companies can learn from others, especially the importance, for example, of collaboration and alliances with our APAC partners. Can you talk about some of the APAC developments around Japan and their relationship with their Asian partners in the context of Trump 2.0?
Yeah, I know it's not the best example because I don't think they're very successful, but Europe definitely does that, or at least try, right? In a similar way, of course, I think if you simply look at the negotiation power, it's not just Trump and it's not just America, it's China too. Japan is thrown in between, and for Japan to successfully continue to strive, needs to think about, can you fight independently or can you push independently? So yes, the more communication and collaboration with the rest of Asia is critical, both in U.S. relationship as well as China relationship, especially when it comes to business. There's a huge opportunity, I think, in more team up between Taiwan and Japan. I know in some sectors they do that, but again, I hear from Taiwanese companies a lot, hey, Tak, help me out. What is Japanese companies thinking? Again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but I think more communication is the trigger point, because if you communicate externally, people will react. If you stay quiet, it's really difficult to engage others, and it stays a mystery box, in my opinion.
Yeah, and unfortunately, today we had a third speaker, Tom Cooney. He's the international policy advisor for Capital Group. He had a last-minute family emergency and could not be with us today. But his focus was on China, having spent his diplomatic years in China. And I wonder about that. What as the geopolitics under Trump 2.0 shifts, and we're really no longer in the post-Cold War norms today, just really grappling for a new world order. So what does this mean for Japan, Brian? How is Japan positioning itself, or should how should Japan position itself within the context of U.S.-China tensions, within the context of a lot of the Asia political developments that's going on right now?
It's a loaded question.
That's why I asked it.
That's right. I think Japan has to be very vigilant in terms of not getting stuck between a rock and a hard place. You've got the U.S. and Japan relationship is one of its the linchpin to security in the Asia Pacific region. Extremely important to both countries. But especially if the tariffs are implemented, the 24% tariffs, it's going to have a very significant negative impact on Japan's economy. And we saw, it's kind of interesting. One of the impacts of the Trump administration, Trump 2.0, is trying to isolate China. In doing so, it's doing by imposing these tariffs, he's doing the opposite, because we saw when the tariffs were announced, you saw for the first time ever the officials from South Korea, Japan, and China talking about strengthening an economic partnership between those three economies. That's the opposite of what Trump wants. But that's exactly what's happening. So I think at the same time, as I say, Japan has to be very vigilant in not getting stuck between a rock and a hard place, between keeping that relationship with the United States, but maintaining its economic relationship with China, which is an important market for them as well, and maintaining security and stability in that region.
So before we go on to Q&A, Tak, do you want to comment on that? How should Japan be positioning itself in an increasingly tense U.S.-China relations?
I don't have much to add to what Brian said on that topic.
Very wise of you. Okay, so let's open it up to the floor for any questions. Comments are welcome as well. Back there.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. My name is Mike Thompson. I'm a former instructor at Kansai Gaidai University in Osaka, where I taught Japanese economics. And I know there's not much clarity, which is kind of the theme of the day, I think, around this partnership, I think is the word that's used, between U.S. Steel and Japan Steel. And my question is whether you all have any thoughts or insights as to where that partnership might lead. Clearly, the administration has said it is not going to allow U.S. Steel to be acquired by Nippon Steel. But might this perhaps suggest some openness and flexibility to a different kind of financial relationship between Japanese companies and U.S. companies?
Highly relevant question. One of you want to take that on?
I can't speak on very specific stuff on that. Like our firm's kind of related, so I pass it to you.
As the gentleman pointed out, there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, again, the president has announced a deal has been made, but neither company has confirmed it yet. I mean, and the details are unknown.
Yeah, and I must say the CFIUS review process is ongoing. Under the merger agreement between Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel, the end date is actually June 18th. So there'll be a lot of action that is forthcoming in the coming weeks. It's been extended, the deadline, twice. And after Biden rejected the deal, there was an extension of that deadline. And then that deadline got aligned along with the two pieces of litigation that ensued. One is Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel suing the U.S. President, CFIUS, and the Department of Treasury. And now, it's litigation between Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel on one hand, and Trump administration and CFIUS and the Treasury Secretary on the other hand. There's a civil litigation that's pending in Pennsylvania. This is against Cleveland Cliffs. So all of the litigation, has been kind of pending and working its way through the courts. But what we are seeing in general is that, President Trump likes to do everything that's opposite of the previous Democratic administration. So, is he going to decline the deal as Biden did? Very unlikely. He's been talking about a minority investment, so not a control position. So that's very much possible. But recently, he's been saying that, the outright acquisition may be possible. Now, my view is that, Trump administration and President Trump, he wants all kinds of foreign money, right? He wants the investment from Nippon Steel. He just doesn't want to look like he's ceding control over an iconic U.S. company. So it's a tightrope that he's walking, but you'll definitely see some news that will be forthcoming in the recent weeks. There may be another extension. There's what's called a NSA, or National Security Agreement, that is being negotiated between Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel and CFIUS. So that is to address mitigation of the risks to U.S. national security. So that's a very complex agreement, and it takes a while to negotiate. Any other questions? Oh, maybe in the middle?
Hi, Eric Fleming, CEO of Yazaki Innovations. Tak, this is more for you from the automotive side. We're talking about the tariffs and so forth and the pain and suffering that the OEMs are seeing, but we're all forgetting about the tier 2s, the tier 1s, et cetera. In your market analysis, or what you're seeing, how much pain do you see across the feeder system into the automotive world, i.e. tier 1s like ourselves or our competitors and so forth? Because as you know, we don't run on the operating margins that an OEM does. Do you think it could be a shift change and maybe force a lot of us to, again, nationalize and come here, which, as you had said before, Nancy, is not an overnight thing. 57,000 employees in Mexico are not going to move here overnight and change it. So do you see a potential crumbling in that type of market?
Fundamentally, no, but I completely emphasize with the fear. I kind of see it. I see a bigger damage in just current hiccup being more of a distraction. So a lot of companies had to throw out their original agenda. They had footprint optimization or digitization that was on the move anyways, let alone like electrification, even though it slowed down in the US a little bit, is still a top agenda for sustainable health of the company, right? And I think the distraction of the past 5 months has put a lot of halt into these things that should have happened. So yes, like in that sense, I think it does create potential distress for some companies that was on the edge. But fundamentally, I think I see it more as a hiccup.
Do we have time for one more? Okay. Over there. Maybe. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Fan Fei. Currently serve as Associate Director for Center for Transnational Law and Business. I want to share my 2 aspects regards to your panel discussion. It's very interesting. First of all, my family business, we invest in Japan for 17 years already, and we represent a lot of big brands in Japan, in pharmaceutical company, cosmetic company, as well as advanced manufacturers. And I have to say that, as you said, Japan is a very, very stable environment, both for business, in policy-wise, as well as business regulation-wise. So we had a really good experience there. And we also represent those business to help their products to enter the market like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, and mainland China. And Jetro, we worked them for a long time, and they give us super great support as well. And we collaborate with local universities such as Mie University, as well as Nagoya University. We got a great collaboration and a good insights, both from combined with our business experience and as well as academia collaboration support regards to policies as well as recommendations. So one problem, as Mr. Ueha mentioned, one problem we have currently is attracting the talent to work for us in domestically Japan. And also, my question for you is, from your perspective, that do you think it's a really good time to enter to the U.S. market, and also for the Japanese companies' needs and their services? Is there a big difference in Asian market compared with the U.S. market? And then another comment I want to add on as a scholar, international trade policy law, and professions regards to Trump 2.0 policies, its impact to the trade in the United States, that we work with a lot Asia countries of their trade policies and supply chain issues, that the problem right now we're facing is it's really hard to replace any country through this supply chain because the globalization is already deepened after the WTO whole system established 2000. And it's that, it's going to take 22 Vietnam to replace China. And currently, the Trump 2.0 policy create a lot of opportunities for these ally countries' businesses and also create great barriers to its competitors. So to those different aside, their stories can be different. So that's all what I would say.
Okay,
Thank you.
could we, two gentlemen have been patiently waiting, so could we just hit a couple more and then you can address? The mic to the gentleman behind.
Hello, my name is Sam Barron. I represent SEPA Partners, so we help American...
Can you stand up?
Oh, sure. So we help American companies invest in Japan and do a lot of market entry. Previously, I worked with the Los Angeles Mayor's Office on international trade and foreign direct investment issues. But my question for the panel is kind of, what is the sense that you're getting, given kind of everything going on with Trump 2.0 and tariff negotiations, about the appetite of Japanese companies, kind of particularly in the automotive sector, to kind of ramp up a lot of foreign direct investment in the United States? And because I know the Japanese government has tried to promote a lot of FDI as kind of a negotiating tactic with the administration in the ongoing talks in Washington. And so I'm curious to kind of, especially from Tak, to hear about kind of the on-the-ground perspective that you're hearing about. Thanks.
Do you want to address that real quickly before we... Yeah. Well, just foreign direct investment in general in the U.S. and the automotive sector.
The current sentiment?
Yeah.
So a lot of the driver for the new investment for automotive, as we all know, was driven by electrification. That has definitely slowed down in North America. Companies have already announced, like downsizing the massive investment they were going to make until 2030. They're postponing it. I think it's important to know, like, it's not being canceled. Electrification will happen. So those investments are still there. It's just pushed out in the timeline. The trend for specific to automotive, like software, defined vehicles, other areas, It's not slowing down. Japanese companies actually have a good, healthy performance right now, as you know, like Toyota and Honda in general, because of the slow electrification is rocking it. So they will continue to invest in those areas. But the big investment for CapEx, especially if it was tied to battery or electrification of the vehicle, it's just getting pushed out beyond 2030. I will emphasize, like, it's not gone, but you have to kind of think about the timeline. It's pushed out for sure.
So we're going to wrap up. I think there was one more gentleman.
Maybe the lady that was asking question about the, is this a good time? Like, I completely hear you on the talent. I do have a lot of, well, come talk to me afterwards, I guess. I'm not pitching myself, but one question you had, is this good time? It depends on the sector. I think we cannot just generalize, is it good time for Japan to invest in US market? As I said, I think some areas of Japan is still very competitive. You have to think about the sector and the technology, or the core.
Okay, we have to wrap up.
So
one more. Yeah, he's been waiting very patiently.
Patient person. Dick Drobnik, formerly with USC. Just a comment to Tak and a comment to Brian. Tak, to get Japanese executives out talking, send them to the universities. Encourage them to go to UCLA and to go to UC Irvine and talk to the engineering students and faculty and bring some to USC also.
Advice, yes.
Brian, the rock and the hard place issue that you were talking about. I'm doing a podcast, and I've interviewed 4 Asian leaders in the last 6 weeks or so, and all of them are saying that Japan and Korea are going to move closer to China, and China's going to move closer to them in the business world, and in spite of treaty alliances with the United States. If the U.S., to all of these different people I'm talking to, has just become more and more and more uncertain. If the U.S. public can elect a leader like we have right now, and I'm a registered Republican, by the way, and a leader who can appoint people who don't know their business too well, we can do it again. We could do it in 28. We could do it in 32. So we're just saying, at the destruction of MFN, the rules-based order, we have to do something different with our neighbors.
Excellent note to end on. Again, thank you so much, Asia Society, to Tom, Andy, Brian, for an excellent panel today. Thank you, Tak and Brian.